4 years have passed since the Arab Spring began. Popular uprisings had raised hope for democratic transitions in the region. Western governments took a leading role in enabling regime change in Libya and Yemen. Today, both are considered failed states. Yesterday, an attack on a hotel in Tripoli left 8 people dead as civil war between various factions continue. In Yemen, Houthi rebels have taken control of the presidential palace. Meanwhile, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is strengthening its stronghold in the south. Joining me from Washington is Robert Worth. He is a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center and a contributor to the New York Times Magazine. From Ithaca, New York, Gregory Johnsen. He is a BuzzFeed writer at large and the author of The Last Refuge, Yemen, al-Qaeda, and America's War in Arabia. With me here in New York, Matthew Waxman. He is a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a professor at Columbia University. Robert, let me begin with you. Tell me what we know about what happened in Libya and what does it mean?
Well, a group claiming to be the Libyan branch of ISIS carried out this attack at the Corinthia Hotel. And it's the first time, it's really unclear exactly who this group is, but the credibility of the claim seems to be pretty high because they announced it just as the attack was beginning. It killed a number of people, and it raises questions about how wide the sway of this group is. In a sense, it doesn't really matter whether it was centrally planned from ISIS's headquarters in Raqqa in Syria, or whether it's simply a group of affiliated people in Libya. The point is that this group has tremendous, its idea has tremendous resonance across the region. You have people, various different jihadi factions allying themselves voluntarily with ISIS who seem to be all inspired by the same vision.
Where else do you see it happening?
You have, I think, the Sinai Peninsula, where you have Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, another jihadi faction that is, if not exactly part of, then allied with ISIS. You have a group that claims to act on behalf of ISIS in Yemen. You've actually had, even from the eastern edge of the Islamic world, various groups pledging allegiance to ISIS.
The Economist wrote on January 10th, Western powers, which assisted in Gaddafi's downfall, have since been conspicuous by their absence. Chastened by failure in Afghanistan and Iraq, they have watched from the sidelines as things have gone from promising to perturbing to bad to worse. President Obama washed his hands of Libya after Islamists killed his ambassador, Chris Stevens, in Benghazi in September 2012. Do you agree with that?
I do think there's some truth to that, that the powers that intervened in Libya and assisted local rebels with the overthrow of Gaddafi have certainly not brought the same sense of urgency that they brought to that intervention to putting Libya back together. Libya has, at this point, broken in at least two major camps that are competing for legitimacy as the proper government. That internal split has also created a vacuum where violent extremist groups, Ansar al-Sharia, groups now proclaiming to be a local branch of ISIS, are able to operate pretty freely.
Other than local militias and local groups, have other people or other powers, other nation states tried to come in and take advantage?
I would say less come in and take advantage, but a number of regional powers have chosen sides, and they're worried about spillover effects. So what you have in Libya, essentially a civil war between an elected government, a once elected government that has now had to flee the capital. It's internationally recognized, has moved to Tobruk. Based in Tripoli, you have another entity claiming to be the proper government, aligned mostly with Islamist factions. And other powers in the region, other powers in the Arab world are worried about how that balance of power is going to play out internally, and they're supporting one side or the other.
So what's the UN doing?
Well, the UN is trying to propose and cultivate a political process. Just this week in Geneva, there was a UN-sponsored meeting trying to bring together the warring factions in some sort of political reconciliation process. There are a couple of problems with that, though, including the fact that not all of the powers on the ground were even represented or willing to participate in that UN process.
It seems to me that what you have here is ISIS being able to extend its authority, or at least its connection to places where it does not have to send soldiers and where it still has some influence from people who are on the ground there.
Absolutely. And I might add one thing. The U.S. is often criticized for its absence in these places. I think in some cases that may be true in some places, but also the U.S. structurally has a problem. I mean, for instance, in Yemen, the U.S. is essentially, joined at the hip with Saudi Arabia, and the Houthi movement was born out of deep and in many ways justified resentment against Saudi policies. So unless the U.S. can create some kind of daylight between itself and Saudi Arabia, which seems really impossible at this point because we're so beholden to the Saudis for information about what's happening there, not to mention our drone program, it's very difficult for us to do the kind of diplomacy that would be required to rebuild the state and create the kind of a structure that would allow us to actually, in a more effective way, to fight the jihadis.
Gregory, let me turn to Yemen. David Ignatius wrote today about Yemen. What happened in Yemen is not very different from the stories of other Arab nations shaken by the Arab Spring revolutions. Armies that had seemed strong under authoritarian rulers crumpled against insurgents. U.S. military intervention hasn't checked the disintegration, nor has American retreat. The conclusion is so obvious we sometimes overlook it. The history is being written by the Arabs, not outsiders. Foreign assistance can help strong, broadly based government, but not fragile, polarized ones. Is this true about Yemen?
Yeah, in Yemen, the U.S. basically has one interest, and it's their one guiding interest, and that is al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, this terrorist group that's based there in Yemen. And so when the Arab Spring erupted in 2011, the U.S. looked at what was happening around the world, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, and it wanted to avoid the sort of collapse in Yemen that it was seeing in these other places. And so it tried to broker a deal that would see the President Ali Abdullah Saleh had been in power for 33 years, some sort of deal that would see him step down and there would be a transition. But what the U.S. did at the time is it basically abdicated all of its authority to Saudi Arabia. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had the sort of lead for the democratic transition in Yemen. And what we've seen is that kicking the can down the road, these sort of 3 years, has not really worked. And so now the government in Yemen has collapsed. The president has resigned. The prime minister has resigned. And now the Houthis have moved in, which is a Shia group, and they're the natural enemy of al-Qaeda. And so what we see is that what's likely to have happen in the next little bit is that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula will actually get stronger. And so what the U.S. wanted to do, weaken, have a good ally there on the ground, it just isn't in a position to do that.
President Obama, Robert, said in August, you look at a country like Yemen, a very impoverished